edition of the Curmudgeon and Cellar XXV, our 25th one, I think. All right. Number of things I want to talk to you about tonight. Let's start with, when I was a kid, I learned nursery rhymes at my mother's knee. She was the one that read to us most of the time, or my grandmother. And one of the earliest ones I recall was "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, how I wonder what you are up above those skies so bright. Wish I may, I wish I might have the wish I wish tonight." Okay, I know I truncated a little in the middle there. It's that word wish. Okay. Oh, by the way, I'm not pimping for Gary Kahn again. My normal headgear presses much too tightly on this thing. I had a basal cell carcinoma taken off a couple days ago. And it's I won't be making a lot of expressive faces tonight because you never know how much your scalp wrinkles until something like this happens. So anyway, we're using this tonight. Where was I? Wishes and fantasy. Fantasy is wishes. Wishes are fantasy. In my opinion, in my mind, they're irrevocably linked. What is, after all, a fantasy but a wish for something better, a dream of something more exotic? Isn't this what we delve in fantasy all the time, is wish? All right, now, wish. There's been a really interesting, well, really, I think it's pointless and futile, but I find it amusing argument going on one of the Facebook pages about the death spell. Level 6, as I recall, and the use of the word irrevocable. Now, I don't know too many definitions of irrevocable that have any wiggle room in them whatsoever. As we discussed it when we parsed basic and advanced before the two were then produced and published, the death spell was the spell from which there was no return. Regardless of what Gary might have said some years later when asked about how that was to be interpreted, and he softened his interpretation, that may be what he meant by it then. That is not what we meant by it then, back when we wrote it. It was the spell that you had no recourse from, except a wish. Now, some of the people that have been getting all huffed and puffed all about this thing have been saying, "Oh, well, wish cops it all out. It's not really an irrevocable thing. If a wish can get it resurrected, brought back, whatever." Well, if you didn't have wishes, it wouldn't be fantasy. It would be fiction. Fantasy is fiction, but fiction is, no dragons and elves and stuff like this in it. So it would not be what we do now. So, of course, the wish is the ultimate game breaker, if you will, if the DM allows that. How do you define your wishes in your game if you allow them in your game? Wishes are... They don't just say, "Ooh, I wish I hadn't stuck my hand in that trap and gotten stuck by the no saving throw poison." Okay, because as a DM, you can look at a wish as altering time and reality, shifting. Perhaps you didn't raise that person from the irrevocable death spell. Perhaps you, by the grace of your deity, were allowed to port in a duplicate from an alternate universe who, up until that point of death, shared all the et cetera adventures. We all know how that one works. We're all delving in these funny things all day long anyway. But sorry, irrevocable means irrevocable. A wish is something in parentheses out here. It's the ultimate weapon at the DM's disposal. A wish can be crocked. Crocked is an old term some of you may not be familiar with, meaning it could be made to go awry. It could be granted literally. Gary Gygax was as good a person as any I know at crocking a wish. If something came up and you ended up with a wish, and he really didn't wish you didn't have that wish, or they wish that you were trying to make a game breaker, I kid you not, he could look at 3 typewritten pages of the wish and all its exclusions and inclusions and et ceteras and so forth. And I mean, I don't care. You could get the Nuremberg lawyers to draw it up, and he'd find a way to crock it. Didn't always do it, but he'd find a way. There was always a way to crock a wish. So if you choose to get around something that's irrevocable, yes, there's the wish. The wish is the outside of all existence entity, thing, whatever, game breaker that can overcome that. But irrevocable is irrevocable. The people that I saw a couple of comments about how Gary must have been overreaching with his vocabulary. The person that said that, I will forgive for not knowing that Gary possessed one of the better vocabularies, certainly one of the richest of anybody I'd ever met up to that point in time, including college professors. Now, granted, he did use words in 40-year-old meanings, and he loved finding words that nobody else could find, digging them up out of books that nobody else had them. But there, I saw somebody parsing whether something was an adjective form or an adverb form. Oh my God, come on. It's irrevocable. That's what it means. I have a feeling that most of the people trying to weasel out of the fact that this is meant to be the one that nobody could weasel out of are the people that probably got trophies for showing up. Anyway, that's taken care of now for a minute. I have a couple other things here. How do you take the wish out of fantasy? Isn't wishing all about what fantasy is ultimately all about? Desire to be somewhere else, the desire to live out somebody else's epic tale. Wishes are always there, whether it's rubbing the lamp and getting 3, or being tricked and having your 3 burned up by a clever genie before you really could benefit from them, or granting them literally. The fairy tales abound with that kind of stuff, mischievous imps and creatures tricking humans, twisting their words around. How do you take it out? You can't. So I guess if you don't like wishes, that you'll just have to either live with it, or take them out of your campaign and play something else that's a limited form of fantasy. If there's no wishing, I mean, good grief. Who of us, when we were young, wished that we were older and didn't have to go to bed at 9 o'clock when it was still light out on a summer evening? Okay? It's wishing. Wishing's all about that. I saw someone posted one of these. I sometimes suspect they're trolling threads, but this was drew my interest. He wondered what could possibly, I paraphrase here, as I often do, but the gist is, I believe, accurate. What would be the harm of just committing some random back to stabbing type move in the middle of their next adventure? Well, that one kind of threw me for a loop. That before the 5-point alignments. Okay, that was a refinement. Before alignments really meant anything except a language that you spoke with others of your alignment that nobody else understood, a secret language. Before all of that, in the group that I was fortunate enough to play with at Carbondale in 74 and 75, we did, before any of this stuff came, just kind of on our own, organically, our group just kind of decided that they would sign like what the pirate, what the Pirates of the Brotherhood of the Coast, the articles, pardon me, and that those articles would be that, you don't leave anybody behind, you don't pocket anything along the way, everything is to the good of the crew, the group, everybody has an equal share. Special items will be fairly dispersed, with first priority being the person that would get the most use out of it. For instance, a magic wand would go to the magic user, not to the fighter. So they kind of sat down and worked this all out themselves in the first couple, 3 adventures, and never varied from it. So I find it kind of a foreign concept that somebody would think it'd just be fun to, throw a monkey wrench into the works like that. Many of the groups that I'm familiar with would probably just, they'd probably behave like a flock of grackles. They'd turn on the weak member and peck him to death. That one really threw me for a limit. Couldn't figure that one out. All right, now I have started talking about a topic that I believe needs to be addressed, and that is behavior at conventions. Let's go back a couple of years. It really got awful at one of the Comic Cons a couple of years ago, when particularly females in costumes were getting groped. Now, that's the worst it got. There was also many inappropriate comments. Now, I'm not here to debate whether people that like to dress up, male or female, at Comic Cons or for costume contests or for cosplay, I'm not going to get into whether they're narcissists or exhibitionists or any of that kind of stuff. Doesn't matter what they are, what drives them to do it. It's something they enjoy doing. They should be able to do it without being hassled. As anybody who's paid any attention to what's gone on in the last year or so, there's been a lot of talk about inappropriate behavior at some conventions. Some people have been unfairly vilified. Others have been informed that they'll no longer be guests at the convention, but free to attend. And it all boils down to bad behavior on the part of male gamers. Let's just get it right out there. All right. Guys, you act like pigs sometimes. We had, back in the 90s, into the early aughts, bikini babes at the booth. That was a passing phenomenon. I happened to know a couple of them, met a couple of them. They were nice young ladies that just enjoyed flashing their goodies in a bikini, made of chainmail, and they drew people to the booths, and that was a marketing ploy at that time. I neither condemn nor support it. It was effective at that time. Standards were different at that time, but now it's time to look at what the standards of behavior are today. A lady, a female, a woman, I'm not ever sure exactly which term is correct today, that chooses to dress in a costume mimicking a character from a comic or from a movie or from a graphic novel or from anime or from wherever, and chooses to follow the dress exactly like, it's not inappropriate to say, wow, nice costume. Oh, you really rocked the costume. The outfit's great. But you don't comment on the person inside the costume. That's not nice. It's inappropriate, guys. And I thought some of you guys were making steps on learning proper social behavior, but apparently you're not. There have been accusations. There have been accusations of people making intimidating remarks, and that shouldn't happen either. In many cases, alcohol seems to be involved. We all know how well we behave when we got a snoot full. But I really think that the convention organizers are missing the boat by not getting together, drafting a statement of purpose, if you will, a code of a conduct, a policy of conduct, similar to what Gamma drew up years ago when it founded to be the gaming industry representative, and what was expected of members of Gamma and the behavior that was expected of them. Now, that's a commercial enterprise, I understand, and that was more about who contributed how much to which advertising budget fund, whatever. But there's no reason that we can't come up with a policy that clearly states that that kind of behavior is unacceptable. Harassment of any kind, bullying of any kind, for whatever reason, is unacceptable. Salacious remarks is not acceptable behavior. Disparaging remarks, racist remarks, homophobic remarks. Come on. I often like to think that we gamers are a little better because we're on average, smarter, and on average better educated, but also it seems on average socially inept to a greater degree than I ever thought, that we don't understand this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to challenge people to send me your local convention's policy if you have one. I've already got one from a comic convention, and we'll see if we can't come up with something that lays out what's acceptable and what isn't. And there's a lot of things besides just the harassment part that this policy can cover. It can cover age appropriateness. It can cover not having the con become a dumping ground babysitter. Age limits on who has to be accompanied and who doesn't, and these types of things, as well as behavior, whether or not they'll be on an alcohol policy, and what it will be. Some conventions have alcohol, open alcohol consumption, and in the evenings for the most part. Some conventions are held at places that have bars and lounges, where of course everybody there is either drinking or not offended by the drinking. There are exclusions and exceptions. A comic con or a convention that has a formalized costume contest would certainly have different standards of what would be appropriate or inappropriate behavior. If some guy was going all beefcake on everybody and was sporting, a Zardoz red loincloth and a headband, there's certain lines there that each con will have to decide where they are, but it's one thing to comment about you don't look anything like Sean Connery, and there's other many more less kind and unpleasant ways to Hey, tub of guts, who do you think you are? All right. It's unkind. Why did you need to be unkind? And, shouldn't we as intelligent, well-educated individuals practice a little kindness just for kindness sake, for just, because we like to do it, because we know it's a nice thing to do. So I'll accept, I'll be glad to get copies of anybody's policy that they have. And I've been tasked by a couple of people for my editing skills of the past, and I'll see what I can come up with. And maybe we'll start an open debate on what is acceptable behavior and what isn't. For instance, at the Texas convention, the North Texas RPG convention, they have young ladies who work there for tips, and I'm not sure if they make a regular wage. They are called bar wenches because there's a lot of stuff that's medieval in flavor down there. Knights, Knight Valiant. There's a lot of medieval terminology used down there. These ladies know what they're doing because they're not 17-year-old girls running drinks or running trays back and forth. They're women that have worked conventions or work in bars or work in restaurants or whatever. And they might get a little flirty, but they know what they're doing and they know how to work guys for tips. But them getting flirty doesn't mean you get to paw them. And that's never happened down there because people understand that's not acceptable behavior. Other conventions, apparently, it's not quite so evident as what's acceptable and what isn't. So I'd like to see a policy drawn up that will end this once and for all. It's useful for the convention organizers to hide behind if they choose to look at it that way and say, look, we adopted this policy, you're violating it, our hands are tied, you have to go. Sorry, you're a 12-year friend of this organization. This behavior is beyond the pale. A couple of those have happened that I'm aware of. They involved alcohol and inappropriate behavior in mixed company. Now, I know that gamers aren't known for their smooth and suave ways with the ladies. At least not the young gamers, hopefully, as you learn what charisma is about you. Anyway, but this is again, as I say, it's not right. I want all the ladies to be comfortable at all our cons because a recent study showed, and it's probably pretty true within 2 or 3 percentage points, 60% of all the people playing games right now are female. That takes into account board games and takes into account handhelds and all that stuff. 60%. And if our little slice of gaming isn't 60 yet, it's likely to be. Or if we continue to act like boors, it'll never be, and it'll probably wither and die. Because, we were that all guy thing before, and it didn't work out that good because we didn't have a lot of numbers. And it's not likely to work out again if we have to go back there. And that's about all I got for this one. I got some interesting comments from the Curmudgeons and Cars getting to Gary Con. I don't know if we'll ever do one of those again, but thanks for the comments. If you have other things you'd like to see addressed, of course, as always, make comments after you read this or listen to it. Read it. Yeah, okay. It is getting late, and this thing on my head is throbbing. So must be time to roll into the see if I can get some sleep tonight. Good gaming and good night. And hopefully the White Death won't get us overnight. That's what we're facing right now. They're all scared. Ooh. Well, we got all the bread, toilet paper, and milk that we need, so we're set. Adieu.